Hi, and welcome to ManchTalk. I'm your host, Tammy Simmons, and I'm glad to have you joining us this week. This week, I'm just going to talk about a bunch of things that bubbled up in the news over the past week. Things that impact Manchester directly, things that just impact people in New Hampshire in general. Some are political, some are not. First off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ongoing problem with opioid addiction in New Hampshire. This morning, I was starting to read on in my Facebook feed a post by Representative Victoria Sullivan saying that her sister's stepson had died of a heroin overdose. It's awful when I read about people I know who have family members or neighbors or good friends who are losing people to addiction here in New Hampshire. It's unfortunate. It's a true problem in New Hampshire. It's not something that is easily addressed. It's not something that's fixed with a single, signing of a single bill or anything. It's a huge problem. It's a problem that impacts us all, both in direct correlation where it does end up being somebody that we know, or in the cost to the taxpayers in New Hampshire. That the bigger the problem gets, the more costly it's going to be for the taxpayers. I know there's still some people out there who probably think heroin use is the same as heroin use was decades ago, where it's just people looking for, to get some sort of high off of it. The reality is that 70 or 80% of all heroin use can be traced back to legal prescription drug use. That's an astounding number when you first hear it, but it really does make sense because there has to have been something that triggered this sudden increase over recent years in the use of heroin and thus fentanyl. And the way it's been explained to me, and it really does make sense, for those of you who don't know, I sit on the Labor Committee up at the State House, and we had a bill about workers' compensation and pain management and prescription opioids, and this caused us to have a lengthy discussion about opioid use in general. And what was kind of surprising to me, although like I said, it's not really that out of the ordinary, is that what tends to happen is somebody gets injured, whether you're in a car accident or you get injured at work or, you're playing football, whatever happens. You get injured and you go to your doctor and you have significant pain. And for a very long time, maybe doctors were overprescribing painkillers. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I'm not the person who should be judging what the doctors should and shouldn't be doing, but it did seem like we had an overabundance of opioids being legally prescribed to people in New Hampshire. Then we tried to address that concern because there were so many prescription opioids out there that we restricted how much could be issued at one time by a doctor, or how many pain pills could be prescribed at the emergency room. And what it really kind of does is it just pushes the person who's actually doctor shopping to get those painkillers. They still are able to go out and do it because they doctor shop. They go to Dr. A and they say, I've got pain, and Dr. A gives them a prescription, and maybe Dr. A reissues that prescription, or they go to Dr. B and they get another prescription. So all our efforts to try to keep track of who's being prescribed what, it's a good thing in some ways, but in other ways, all it did was take a bunch of people who were already addicted to the opioid prescription drugs and make it far more difficult for these addicted people to get the drugs that they were addicted to. So what happens then? Maybe your insurance stops paying. Maybe your doctor stops prescribing. You can't just apply basic logic and say, well, you just stop taking them. That's easy for me to say. It might be easy for you to say, but we're not addicted to opioids. For the person who's addicted to them, whose system is telling them that without this drug, they are going to suffer pain, they're going to do things that maybe wouldn't make sense to the rest of us. So those people, maybe because they're no longer able to get them from a pharmacy, perhaps they find a way to buy those prescription drugs on the street. So they start buying their Percocets or their oxycodone or whatever the case is on the street for very hefty sums. that might work for a month or so because come to find out, holy cow, I'm spending thousands of dollars on these street level prescription drugs. So then they find out that heroin or fentanyl might be $5. This is the brain of an addict that we have to remember, who says, I can now get that relief for just $5. Yeah, I know it's not, it's risky, but I'll be fine and I have to have it. And all of a sudden you've got people addicted to heroin or fentanyl, and that it sounds crazy, but I really do believe that this is a logical progression on how it may happen. Now, there's also peripheral people involved because might have inquisitive teenagers who find, Percocet or oxycodone or whatever in their parents' drug cabinet and think it's fun because they're not, they're kids and they're not the brightest always, to try this drug because, other people are taking opioids. And then they inadvertently become addicted. I recall somebody telling me a story about, I read it in the paper, I think it was a kid from Bedford, not really sure, who had been struggling with addiction because he had had an addiction. He went for treatment. His family got him into a treatment plan. He got off the drugs. Everything was fine. He inadvertently went to, well, not inadvertently, he went to his doctor because he had the flu or a cold or something, and they prescribed him cold medicine or flu medicine that had opioid in it, and he relapsed, and he ended up overdosing on heroin. And it, like I said, it may seem unbelievable to those of us who are not addicted, but that's the problem with addiction. You're addicted, and it's like you can't help yourself, and in order for us to stop this, we're going to have to go at it from a variety of points. I've always been a strong believer that the single biggest way to end the demand or to end the supply of opioids in New Hampshire is to end the demand. And the only way to end the demand for heroin and fentanyl in New Hampshire is to treat the addicted. In the legislature earlier this year, we late I guess it was late last fall, we had a joint emergency legislative session to institute a drug task force to deal with the opioid crisis. They came up with some bills, and in January the legislature met again, and we passed a couple bills, one of which was supposed to streamline access to treatment, which for those of us who believe that treatment is the way out of part of the problem, that was very important. That was in January. Then, later this year, New Hampshire awarded a $1.2 million contract with no bid. It was a no-bid contract to a New York-based corporation called FedCap. Now, this bid talks about Granite Pathways, which is an organization here in New Hampshire. But Granite Pathways went out of business in December of last year because they didn't have funding. In a recent Union Leader article, Granite Pathways co-founder Pamela Brown told the Union Leader that at the time that the organization was able to convince state officials to help fund its organization. So last December, Granite Pathways, who was already treating people here in New Hampshire, in essence went out of business because they couldn't get the state to give them funding. Yet this year we gave $1.2 million to FedCap to coordinate with Granite Pathways, which is no longer in business. Interesting little tidbits about FedCap. They are a New York-based firm specializing in federal contracting. They make their money off of getting federal contracts, and part of this $1.2 million was federal dollars, which, don't be confused, those are still your tax dollars, whether they're federal dollars or state tax dollars. According to their own website, FedCap offers an array of services through 4 practice areas: education, workforce development, occupational health, and economic development. The Manhattan-based nonprofit boasts nearly $200 million in annual revenue and has a CEO who was paid $500,000 in 2013, and they spend nearly 60% of their revenue on salaries and compensation. So we have organizations that have been established in New Hampshire that have already been treating people that needed assistance from the state of New Hampshire, and instead of funding them, we gave $1.2 million in a no-bid contract to a New Hampshire-based organization so that they could set up organizations in New Hampshire to do things that organizations in New Hampshire already were doing. I don't know if that sounds smart to you. It doesn't really sound smart to me. We've passed bills to address the opioid crisis. We've allocated over $1 million to an out-of-state organization to combat the opioid crisis. We've allocated almost another $2 million to combat the opioid crisis in a variety of ways. Yet treatment for addiction still isn't streamlined. There are no new beds. People who are addicted still have very few places to turn for help. And unfortunately, people's sons, their daughters, their neighbors, friends of their neighbors are dying because of the opioid crisis in New Hampshire. It's a daunting problem. I I don't think I don't think government is doing a good job of managing the money that we're giving them to manage this situation. I think it takes far too long for the government to implement things. I think it takes far too long for the government to go to another state's organization to set up things in New Hampshire when there are plenty of organizations here in New Hampshire that are already established, that are already in place. I think that's where we need to spend our tax dollars first and foremost, dealing with things within New Hampshire rather than shipping it out of the state for them to ship it back in state. So that was one subject I wanted to talk about. On a similar note, completely different, but it's all the same ball of wax in a way. Last week, the AG's office released a report about state legislators who had either purchased marijuana or smoked marijuana with former Representative Kyle Tasker, who is facing unrelated, all sorts of charges about luring a teenager or something. I don't know. Much greater charges than smoking pot. I read the report. I'm not really sure what the point was. Basically, it looks like the AG's office, they might have been doing a legitimate investigation trying to determine, say, who Kyle Tasker's source was for his drugs, because he seemed to be selling drugs. So they went through his computer, they went through his iPad, and then thus they went through all his social media accounts. Facebook alone, according to the report, just Facebook provided 65,000 pages of communications from Kyle Tasker. 65,000 pages. So then somebody, I guess, in the AG's office went through all of this stuff and went through emails and went through Twitter accounts and went through all these different social media surfaces. And they identified either 5 or 6 reps who may or may not have communicated about drugs with Kyle Tasker. They dragged in 5 of these reps, questioned them under the agreement that anything they said, as long as it was truthful, wouldn't be used to prosecute them. It didn't say that they couldn't prosecute them. It just said that the information they provided would not be used to prosecute them. One of the reps apparently didn't have anything, just because somebody has a conversation doesn't mean that they did. There was no proof that they had ever bought drugs from him, had ever smoked drugs with him. I believe it was 4 out of the 5 named, actually I take that back. 3 out of the 5 named were found to have admitted to have purchased marijuana from Kyle Tasker. All had medical conditions that they felt deemed it okay. 2 of those 3 had medical marijuana cards. For those of you who don't know, it's been years now since we passed our medical marijuana laws in New Hampshire, and it wasn't until just this year that a dispensary was finally opened. So we said, yes, doctors can prescribe medical marijuana, but you can't buy it legally in New Hampshire. So those suffering, which among the 5 names released as, having done this, one of these people has since died. Representative Shem Kellogg died of cancer in June. Yet the Attorney General's office felt it necessary to include him in this report, release his name, the name of a dead man, in a report tying him to Kyle Tasker when he couldn't even interview him. I mean, Seriously, this is what our attorney general's office is spending time on. One of the state reps that was included in the report has a medical marijuana card for himself, but like I said, at the time there was nowhere to purchase the medical marijuana that he had a card for. A second rep on the list had his wife had a medical marijuana card because she had like stage 4 breast cancer. And, I don't fault that rep for going and buying pot if it was going to help alleviate his wife's pain and suffering. I'm sorry. I just don't think that that's the role of government. If doctors are legally able to prescribe this, then people should be legally able to get it. And it's a shame, it's actually disgusting that it took New Hampshire so long from the time the legislature passed this bill to actually open a dispensary. It shouldn't take years for these things to happen. There's no reason to complicate it and slow the process down to the snail's pace that is typically government for these things to happen. These are people's lives. Looking at the AG's report, I had to wonder, like, so what was the point of the report? Nobody was charged. None of these 5 people were charged. One of them couldn't be charged because he's dead. Even the ones that might have been charged, even the report itself says a jury of their peers would never have convicted them of anything because it was obvious that they weren't, they weren't people just going out there and illicitly purchasing drugs just for the hell of it. So if no charges were going to come from it, and there was nothing of substance in there, and the jury was never going to convict anybody, I'm very curious. So just how many man hours at the AG's office did we spend on this witch hunt? What was the purpose of all this? Just to put these 5 representatives' names out in the public? Because I did find it interesting that the report only focused on these state representatives, not on other people who may have bought pot with Kyle Tasker or other people who may have been identified as smoking pot with Kyle Tasker. Only these 5 reps were dragged through the mud. Is that what the AG's office role is? Who asked them to do this? Which citizen in New Hampshire said, I need you to find out who's doing this? I just don't think that the AG's office should spend your hard-earned money, my hard-earned money, investigating something that, rightly, I think most people just really think isn't of substance enough to spend time on. The legislature has time and time and time and time again passed decriminalization bills at the state house to allow change the fines and the penalties for small amounts to possess small amounts of marijuana. That's not saying you can sell. That's not saying we condone the activity. It just says that should these people really be charged with a crime, or should it be a penalty like driving without a license or anything else? I don't know about you. These are not the things that I want the government spending my money or their time focusing on. The third thing that came up in the last few days was a federal appeals court struck down New Hampshire's ban on ballot selfies. For those of you who don't know what a ballot selfie is, it's when you go into the voting booth on election day and you fill in the dots and you take a picture of your ballot and you post it on Facebook. That's a ballot selfie. Some people take it with their face. Some people just take a picture of their ballot. 2 years ago, New Hampshire became the first state in the nation to make it against the law for a voter to take a digital picture of a completed ballot and then post it on social media. And anyone found guilty could be faced with a fine of up to $1,000. These are the priorities of our government. Now, let's think this through. Let's just talk through the ballot selfie thing. First of all, when you go in the ballot booth and you take the ballot and you fill in the little dots, you can take a picture of it, right? And then you could spoil that ballot and get another ballot and fill it in with the actual votes that you are actually going to cast. Until that ballot actually goes in the ballot booth, into the counting slot, it's not a live ballot. So what are you posting a picture of? You're posting a picture of what you're saying will be your vote. It's not necessarily a picture of your vote. The only way you'd be able to do that is to get it somehow after it was in the machine and take a picture of it. People are concerned that, this is going to be about coercion and unions are going to coerce their members to vote a certain way and prove that they voted a certain way. Well, here's the thing. We already have laws against coercion. Coercion is illegal in the state of New Hampshire, and having a law that infringes on people's First Amendment rights is not the solution to coercion. The court concluded that the ban restricted innocent political speech in the pursuit of what the judges called an unsubstantiated and hypothetical danger of vote buying. What was kind of disturbing is Secretary Gardner had said in an interview with Union Leader, the fact is that these ballot selfies do make it easier for voters to prove how they voted, and that could be used in a future way as a way to sell one's vote. State prosecutors admitted in the case that they could not cite a single example of voter buying or coercion in recent history. So there's no coercion happening, there's no vote buying happening, but Secretary Gardner still wants us to have a law to stop this stuff that's not happening. The judges said the state could have passed a law to make it a crime for someone to use a ballot selfie in order to either sell or their vote or comply with someone else's attempt to coerce them. But the judge wrote, a ballot selfie prohibition is like burning down the house to roast a pig. Silliness. Again, where does the government get off going down this road? What's really kind of additionally disturbing is Deputy Secretary of State Dave Scanlon said the state will now weigh its options, which include appealing the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Who are you appealing it to the court on behalf of? Which resident of the state of New Hampshire went to the Secretary of State's office and said, you must stop these ballot selfies? I doubt there was anybody. Just like in Croydon. Who in Croydon went to the Department of Education and said, I don't want my tax dollars spent sending kids from Croydon to the neighboring Montessori school? There was no complaint on behalf of a citizen. It's just the Department of Education took it upon themselves to sue the town of Croydon. I don't think the Secretary of State should be filing lawsuits on behalf of people that don't file the complaint themselves. I don't think the State Board of Education should be filing lawsuits against towns. I don't think this is the appropriate role of government. Government is not there to exist in their own entity. They're not there to provide jobs. They're not there to employ people. They're there to work on behalf of you and me. We are the government. Sometimes I think they forget that. It's you and it's me that make up the government. We decide what we want. They're not supposed to decide things on our behalf. I don't want them deciding if I can get in an Uber car or not. I don't want them deciding if I can take a picture of my ballot. Stop protecting me from me. Okay. So that said, I just think people need to step back and sometimes think about what the role of government is, what they think the government should and shouldn't do. It really does make it easier when I go to cast votes in Concord, because sometimes it is a clear thing that it may be something I agree with philosophically, but it might not be the role of government. So I hope people stop and think sometimes before they jump to any conclusions. So I do want to talk about a couple of really some positive things. I don't want to just be here complaining to people. I want to tell you about some things going on in Manchester in the next week or so. I'll start with the easy stuff. I want to remind people that the Manchester Farmers Market continues through October 21st. It is Thursdays 3 to 6:30 p.m. at Victory Park. You can get more information on that at manchestercommunitymarket.org. Did you know that you can go to the Courier Art Museum for free? I didn't know that. Well, apparently, museum admission for New Hampshire residents only is available on the second Saturday of each month from 10 a.m. to noon. So if you're a New Hampshire resident and you arrive at the museum before noon, you can stay all day for free. I had no idea. So just so you know, this coming Saturday, I guess that would be the 8th of the month. That's the second Saturday. So if you want to go to the Courier, you can go this coming Saturday, October 8th, for free if you arrive between 10 a.m. and noon and you're a New Hampshire resident. You can get more information there at Courier, CURRIER.org. There's foliage viewing this weekend, also the weekend of the 8th and the 9th at the Weston Observatory. If you don't know, the Weston Observatory is located behind Dairyfield Park. The Manchester Historic Association puts on this event. They've done it 2 years in a row, I guess. There's a tower that stands 66 feet tall, and it gives you views of Manchester and the surrounding areas from the observation deck. Normally, this is closed to the public, but the Manchester Historical Association had it open this past weekend and will be open again the weekend of the 8th and the 9th during peak foliage season. You can bring a lunch. There's picnic tables. It is not accessible to wheelchairs or if you have walking disabilities, so, just keep that in mind. It's $7 per person, $20 for family. They conduct walking tours of the area every day, Saturday and Sunday at 1 p.m. The cost of the walking tour is included in the cost of climbing, or you can just pay $5 for the walking tour. You can get more information from the Manchester Historic Association at manchesterhistoric.org. You can email history@manchesterhistoric.org. And lastly, I wanted to talk about a fundraiser that's coming up in a couple weeks, Empty Bowls for New Horizon. It's sponsored by the New Hampshire Potters Guild. This event raises money for New Horizons for New Hampshire. Empty Bowls is an international project to fight hunger, and the New Hampshire Potters Guild members make and donate ceramic soup bowls, which is kind of fun. For $25, you get to keep the bowl, and you get to taste a bunch of sampling of soups from 16 different local restaurants. It's held at Brookside Congregational Church, and this year it is on Sunday, October 16th, from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And if you Google Empty Bowls New Horizons, I'm sure you can find more information. But it's Sunday, October 16th, 11:30 to 1:30 p.m. at Brookside Congregational Church. Great way to raise money for New Horizons, and you get to go home with a great ceramic bowl made by some local artisans, so that's awesome. As always, you can always find out things to do here in Manchester by visiting In Town Manchester, intownmanchester.com. They have a whole calendar. They have things going on, music at different local bars and restaurants. That's where I found out about the Western Observatory thing. They just list all sorts of things. There's lots of things for kids to do, different art items, things like that. Intownmanchester.com. And if you want to do things across the state, visit nh.gov is a great place to start. I couldn't spell out the link for it, but they have a foliage tracker on their website. If you go to visit nh.gov and click on foliage and stuff, it brings up a foliage tracker, and you can look where in the state the peak foliage is and when they expect it to be, so that if you're taking a trip out, you know which parts of the state you can go to get the best foliage. So there's always so many wonderful things to do, even when the temperatures are cooler like they are now. Today, it's Monday, the 3rd of October as I tape this, and it's beautiful and it's sunshiny out there and the rain has stopped. As always, if you have any ideas for a show, if you have any ideas for a guest, if you want to send me a comment, whether pro or con, about what I've talked about here, please do reach out to me. You can get me via email at manchtalk@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter at ManchTalk. And I'd love to hear from some people. I'd love to have some feedback. I'm always open to talking about subjects that people want to hear about. I can't emphasize enough that, we have a great community here in Manchester. We have our share of problems, but it is a great town to live in. There's a lot of beauty in our outdoors. Go out to Massabesic, take a walk on the trails out there, take your dog to the dog park, take a walk on the bike path. There's a new bike path up in Hooksett, near the dog park up there. Take a walk on that. Go over to Goffstown, wherever it is. Get out, enjoy some of the beauty in our town, in our surrounding communities. Snow's coming in a couple months. We don't want to miss out on all these beauty in the fall. That's all I have for this week. I'll see you next week. Have a safe week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.